Welcome, Age of Vintage Society. Ricky Nelson was introduced to acting early in his life and resented his lack of freedom. Still, Ricky stole people's hearts with his incredible singing and acting talent. Why was Ricky Nelson a passive-aggressive rebel? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Ricky Nelson was the original teenage idol. Life magazine, in a stroke of creative brilliance, coined the word for him when he was tearing it up as an actor and singer just at the age of 16. Ricky was the guy every girl wanted to be with. He was the ultimate teen heartthrob. Imagine Elvis but younger and less daring, and you would arrive at Rick. He was the propped-up anti-Elvis. While Elvis would thrust his hips at his female audience, causing them to swoon and lose their minds, Rick offered a different kind of charm, the family-friendly charm. But people didn't know that Rick was every bit of a rebel as Elvis was. Only that Rick had a subtle way of being a rebel. With his strict father and their family's portrayal of what the ideal American family was through their show, Ricky couldn't be bold as Elvis was. Not while Ozzie, his father, remained alive. But Ricky rebelled against his strict father, for in his father's, Ozzie's, pursuit of success, his two children couldn't be children. How could they be when their father constantly reminded them that they could be out of a job if they acted like typical teenage idiots? Acting like idiots is a fundamental part of childhood, but Ricky couldn't even have that part. A real family playing a real family on television. The audience loved their show, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, which began as a radio show. The show ran for 20 years and Ricky became a part of it when he was 8, meaning he was swamped by the schedule of rehearsing for the show. There was no time for toys, touch football, baseball, or any other sort of stuff a young American boy would enjoy doing. Instead, he had to cope with their restrictive Hays Code. The Hays Code meant the boys had to act according to a moral clause in the contract they signed with ABC, the television studio that aired their show. The studio and the public watched the boys with extreme scrutiny. Ozzie kept his boys in line. As he was writing the scripts for their show, so was he writing the scripts for his children's life. So Ricky didn't live for himself, but for his dad. His life was an extension of his father's life. Ozzie Webb firmly had Ricky in place. This was the major cause of Ricky's rebellion. But he couldn't be obvious with it. No, he couldn't, so he devised the less risky Ricky way of doing this. Ricky became passively hostile. His acts of hostility ranged from sleeping in when they had to shoot and, by doing so, wasting his father's time. Also, sometimes he tore up his scripts and acted as if he couldn't see them. Boy, was he convincing. There were times his rebellion was obvious, but this was when he got older. He would go on to race cars and take part in demolition derbies. Nelson almost lost his life in a demolition derby accident. The man also took part in bullfights and rode horses. Perhaps his greatest act of rebellion was when he rejected his father's push that he should go to college. His father wouldn't let him enjoy his life without finding a way to make what Ricky enjoyed a part of the show. Ricky loved tennis. It was where he could escape from the pressure of being a young actor, but his father added tennis as Ricky's sporting interest on screen. This ruined the sport for the boy. This wasn't the only thing his father ruined for him. Ricky's father also ruined being a trapeze acrobat for Ricky and his older brother David. David, sooner than Ricky, had had it with their father's over-controlling attitude. David Nelson was supposed to direct some episodes of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, as David aspired to become a director. Ozzie only pretended to give control, but was always checking and changing things. This pushed David to do some things on his own, things that gave him control. David raced cars under another name, and when the opportunity came, he auditioned and got the part of a trapeze acrobat, Tommy Gordon, in the film Big Circus. David trained his butt off for that role so much that he became a trapeze acrobat for the next 5 years after the film's release, and he introduced trapeze to his brother Ricky. The two had found something away from their father's influence, and what did Ozzie do? Ozzie ensured to add the plot of trapeze into their show. Now he controlled it for them. Imagine the frustrations those two boys felt. So rebelling and not going to college must have been a sweet victory for the dashing Ricky Nelson. Although rebelling against going to college was not only because he did not want to do what his dad wanted, the truth was he didn't have the motivation for college. He was earning more than most Americans made at the time. Also, his dad had a law degree, but instead of practicing as a lawyer, he chose the path of an entertainer. Ozzy created a band, the Ozzy Nelson Orchestra, which allowed him to earn money as a student. Through his exploits as a musician, he met his future wife and Ricky's mum, Peggy, or Harriet, as she would come to be known. So why should he, Ricky, bother to study what wouldn't be useful? However, Ricky's rebellion didn't last. His talent wouldn't allow it. Ricky inherited the musical skills of his father and mother. He sang, although awkwardly, Fats Domino's I'm Walkin', and the audience went berserk for how much of a brilliant musical performer Ricky was. His dad smelled an opportunity, and in the middle of the audience wanting more of the superstar's singing talents, the boy released his first single, Poor Little Fool. It was a hit. An album titled Ricky soon followed. So as a teen he performed as a musician, went on tours, then had to come back to film for their show. Nelson was swamped, but he coped with what would become his regular schedule. However, the schedule that guided him from when he was a boy to a teen and then a man got disrupted. Two things happened. First, the adventures of Ozzy and Harriet ended in 1966. Freedom came to him at last, and the young man didn't know what to do with it. He said, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have to worry about money or a job, but I didn't have any real interest in a career. Finally, he chose to become a full-time singer. The second event that shook his schedule was his father's death from cancer. That death even shook him more. His father's constant presence disappeared, and everything in his life tumbled, including his music and marriage to his childhood sweetheart, Chris. Eric Hilliard Nelson, born May 8, 1940 to Ozzy and Harriet Nelson, married Chris Harmon in 1963 in what Rick later described as a shotgun wedding. The two of them married at the insistence of their parents. The purpose of the marriage was to cover up the fact that Chris, a girl brought up on the Catholic creed, had gotten pregnant before marriage, and a member of the ideal American family, Ricky, was having premarital sex. Chris was 3 months pregnant when they married. Her Catholic father, who was a war hero and football star, had no qualms about lying about the nature of his daughter's pregnancy. Ricky, too, actively lied about it to the media and kept up with the act, so much so that he put his baby daughter into an incubator. Shotgun wedding or not, the two loved each other, with Chris having a crush on Ricky as far back as when she was 11 years old. Ricky was her first flame, but she wasn't his. Ricky, the teenage heartthrob, had fallen for Marianne Gabba, his on-screen girlfriend for 3 episodes. The two had steamy private sessions off-screen, but nothing too sexual. According to Marianne, they only necked. However, the two wouldn't be. Papa and Mama Nelson wouldn't allow it. The dashing Nelson's next relationship was also an on-screen girlfriend. Laurie Collins and Ricky genuinely loved each other so much that they were discussing marriage. Harriet Nelson squashed the relationship as her son didn't need a woman yet. What she felt her boy needed was to focus on his career. Harriet was always clueless when it came to her son. No wonder she felt what Ricky needed when he was broke was a $35 lamp. Yeah, Ricky would become broke. Ozzy and Harriet approved of Chris's interest in their son. What parent wouldn't? Chris was from a respectable family, which could only be positive for their son. The Nelsons wholly accepted Chris. According to Chris, they saw her as a bona fide human being. Maybe they didn't know Chris was her family's black sheep. Chris wasn't as docile as her siblings were. The lady was everything parents would want in a child. She was intelligent, academically brilliant, and willful. However, her being willful meant she wasn't taking the predetermined life path her parents expected her to take. In Ricky, she found a rebel partner, and those two did things. Now we aren't talking about pregnancy. The two used drugs. We know, right? Shocking, but then it isn't completely out of pocket. The two teenagers shoehorned by their parents and feeling pressured. Typically, these kids of teenagers seek relief anyhow they can get it. Chris and Ricky were typical. However, Chris decided they had had enough and should stop. She took bold steps to enroll herself and her husband in therapy. Chris was determined, but Ricky wasn't. Her parents didn't help, as they didn't acknowledge the issue. Their marriage suffered, and the mess was spilling over to the children. Chris claimed instead of the real issue behind the marriage, different rumours came out. Chris became the bad guy, with people saying she was controlling and domineering. The death of Papa Ozzie meant there was no one to rein Ricky. The Nelson family didn't have direction anymore. Harriet had become a shell of herself and was unaware of the troubles her son faced. Ricky was on his own, and after surviving a divorce scare in 1977, his efforts at working on the marriage had become too late. Chris seeing her husband with two hot cheerleaders wasn't a forgettable thing. 3 years later the two divorced, and it was messy. It was so terrible that Chris backed up a moving van and just took all the furniture. Then she got $1 million in settlement. A few years after the divorce, Ricky died. It was a plane crash. His career was on a decline, and he hoped to revive it. His finances weren't what they once were, as he spent heavily buying sports cars and other expensive things, so Ricky couldn't get a better plane. He took the one with a history of problems and lost his life for it. Things were bad with his wife when he died, but his death made it worse for Chris. It sent her over the edge. Chris became a different person to her son Sam. This made Sam call his uncle Mark, and after a rare intervention from her family, she went into rehab. Her son began to stay with her younger brother Mark. Chris got out of rehab, but her family was determined to keep her son from her. The black sheep had become blacklisted. No one wanted to associate with her in the Harmon family. Then, in a brutal move, they began custody proceedings against her. To be honest, the Harmon family was looking at Sam's best interest, but not Chris's. Chris fought back, and she knew how to make things messy. She began revealing dark stuff about Mark's family that scared the life out of him. He took off and opted to settle out of court. It all went wrong with the deaths in the Nelson family. Ricky, before his death, had a successful music career, which began to flounder as Ozzie died. Ozzie dictated everything, much to the chagrin of the younger Nelson. He had a dual career as an actor and a singer, and it all started with the Here Come the Nelsons, which led to The Adventure of Ozzie and Harriet show. His first song was on the show. Through that show he built a career as a musician and actor. After releasing his first single, which got massive audience appreciation, more could only follow. He had roles in The Story of Three Loves, then as a macho gunslinger in Western film Rio Bravo, which was a commercial success due to Nelson's inclusion. Then he had 2 offers, one from John Wayne to star in The Alamo, and the other film The Wackiest Ship in the Army. Ricky went for the second film, as his dad had gotten him a singing part. He sang Do You Know What It Means to Miss New Orleans, and people loved it. However, he didn't get his fame from singing rock and roll, even as he was a rock and roller at heart. His ever-controlling dad got him to change his style. He went from rocking to singing ballad style, and he hated every bit of it. Ozzie was sure that rock and roll was done. Buddy Holly died, Elvis was drafted into the army, Little Richard quit rocking, Jerry Lee Lewis and other big names suffered controversies. Well, the switch proved the right move, as Buddy sold records and charted more often than not. You Are the Only One peaked at 25, but there was more to come. The more was Travelin' Man, which J.W. Alexander put in the trash, as he felt the song was trash after playing it. Jerry Fuller wrote the song for Sam Cooke. Rick's bassist, Joe Osborne, heard the demo and asked for it. Alexander took it from his trash and gave it to him. Joe played it for Rick, Rick loved it and sang it for America. Now Americans loved it too, so Rick's best hit song came to be. It peaked at number 1 and sold millions. His songs that followed didn't reach that height, but they didn't do badly too. His father came up with another crazy idea, sing Teenage Idol. Ricky didn't like it, as he felt the song made him look boastful and vain. Well, Ozzie got what Ozzie wanted. They went ahead with the song, and it was a hit, reaching number 5 on the charts. However, Ozzie wasn't always right. Ozzie cost his son $750,000 as he offended the bosses at Imperial. Ozzie can be a ruthless negotiator, so Ozzie got his son out of Imperial, and in response Imperial released excess royalties, which cost $750,000. Most of the sum was taken as taxes. Despite all of Ozzy's overbearing nature, his son's career began to tank when he died, although before then there were signs of dwindling, but nothing as bad as what happened after Ozzy died. He had a resurgence with the Garden Party song. However, the resurgence was short-lived as he died before beginning his comeback tour. Ricky inspired artists in England and also delighted the hearts of millions of fans worldwide. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Not all actors could passively hide their aggression like Ricky. Was George Peppard banned because of his drinking habit? Watch this video.